Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's the morning of Monday, the 1st of April 2019. And of course, it's a bit of an unfortunate date that I make the statement that the UK is now an EU vassal state with an occupied government, a government of occupation. Well, of course, we should have been celebrating and partying this past weekend. We should have been celebrating Friday, March 29th, 2019 as Independence Day, the day when the UK broke free of the EU as a result of the referendum carried out in June 2016. So this would have been independence without the proverbial shot being fired, although I'm not necessarily sure that that's strictly true. But nonetheless, March 29th wasn't the day of celebration that some 17.4 plus million people had hoped for. Primarily because, once again, the British Parliament demonstrated that it is a bubble. It is so far out of touch with the reality around the rest of the country that ignorant, arrogant, self-serving MPs who were told by the most pompous individual in the UK, John Bercow, that they weren't treasonous, that he was convinced that they were all doing their level best. Yeah, all doing their level best to protect their incomes, which they believe long term are reliant on the EU, because many of them are looking for sinecure EU jobs once they get kicked out of British politics. And hopefully many of those parliamentarians who have effectively decided to defecate on the British people, hopefully their parliamentary and political careers will soon be coming very much to a hard and fast end. Because if a general election comes out of this, then that's perhaps an opportunity to reset the balance here. Unfortunately, the number of people who elect not to vote will probably inadvertently and unwittingly contribute to the status quo being maintained. Never has so much potential power been held by so many who refuse to participate in the system. And I completely understand that, and I understand the sentiment. But from a perspective of logic, then it's handing the establishment the continued status quo on the proverbial silver platter. So, this is something that people really need to reflect upon. So, the European Union Withdrawal Act of 2018 states in basically the opening paragraph that the European Communities Act of 1972 is repealed by the Withdrawal Act on exit day. Now, I know that there are some legal discussions going on right now as to whether exit day was actually defined as Friday, March the 29th. And if that's the case, then Parliament is effectively in breach of its own legislation. And let's see over the next few days whether or not somebody decides that it's appropriate to initiate a judicial review on the parliamentary decision to ignore March the 29th and just keep kicking the can down the road. And there's no question that the Remain camp must be celebrating the crap out of the weekend, because the British public, the establishment believes, are so dumbed down, they are so apathetic that despite a majority of people voting to get out of the EU, having kicked the can down the road for over 2.5 years now, when it doesn't happen, people will just shrug and go, oh dear, what a shame, never mind, let's carry on. Well, if that is, of course, the case, then bottom line is that the UK no longer exists. On the other hand, if, and it's a massive if right now, an appropriate number of people do decide that they are just not going to be rolled over and their will ignored, then we'll see what happens, because the creativity of the British people is certainly something that never fails to amaze me. Unfortunately, the establishment is doing everything it possibly can to shut down that creativity. So what's going on? Well, we have more indicative votes, which is, in other words, it's Theresa May or her puppeteers actually floating out a number of options just to see what might actually get accepted and might not. And basically, the way things are rolling out, Parliament is now just looking to, or most parliamentarians just looking to protect their salary and their expenses, which have just been published. And if you want to see what your MP is claiming in expenses, and it seems that the average is something in the region of about £200,000 a year in expenses, and much of that, of course, goes on staffing. And guess what? A big chunk of those staffing costs get paid to family members. So no nepotism there. It seems that nepotism is certainly the nature of the beast once you get into politics. It's get your snout in the trough and just see how much you can suck down and protect your own bank balance at the expense of a significant chunk of other people around the country. It's not good, is it? It's really not good at all. And how this is going to unfold, I think, is going to be very, very dependent upon whether or not people adopt a gilet jaune type approach, and or maybe come up with something even more creative. But the establishment believes it's got the British people right where it wants it, in total subjugation. So if we have a general election, what's the likely outcome? Well, Jeremy Corbyn has, of course, shot himself and the Labour Party, not just in the foot, but just in just about every other body part, by changing tack. The Labour Party, which has been traditionally anti-EU, all of a sudden is pro-EU. And of course, this is in big part to Jeremy Corbyn succumbing to the Blairite-driven campaign of fake anti-Semitism. And, I'm sure anyone can dig up anything they really want. And then when the media runs with it, and who's running with it? Oh, it's Murdoch. And by the way, anyone who thinks this is unique to the UK isn't necessarily then paying attention to what's going on in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, where anti-Semitism's allegations are being thrown out left, right and centre in an attempt to shut down meaningful discussion, meaningful debate on the continued genocidal agenda of the Zionist Israeli government. So Jeremy Corbyn has succumbed to that, and consequently taking a now pro-EU, pro-second referendum stance, has managed to ostracise probably twice as many people as signed up to join the Labour Party when he first took office, and then subsequently fought off the challenges, and the support around the country was clearly enormous. But Jeremy, you've decided to ignore the people and succumb to a few vocal Blairites. And the people aren't stupid. Well, they might be dumbed down, but they aren't stupid. And they can see that you have effectively sold out here. So the Labour Party isn't an option. So what with the Tories? Well, if the Tories, of course, go to the polls, then it's not going to be under the leadership of Theresa May. And the front runner is, according to the lamestream media and Rupert Murdoch, Michael Gove. Well, if Michael Gove becomes Premier, then it's an occupation government of a different ilk. Because, and I quote, Michael Gove is on public record as saying, "I am proud to have been a Zionist and a friend of Israel all my adult life." And this is the elephant in the room. There's a presentation I gave in California in 2010 in San Jose, where I was talking about the elephants in the US government that nobody wanted to talk about, the dual passport holders, this extremely influential state with a genocidal agenda to eradicate the indigenous population of the entire area between the Nile and the Euphrates. And then, they're effectively buying politicians in the likes of the US and Canada, Australia and the UK to protect Israeli interests. So they're not interested in what goes on in those countries. What's more important is protecting Israeli interests. And it's not just Israeli, of course, it's the Zionist Israeli agenda. And before anybody really wants to launch it to say Ian Crane's an anti-Semite, hang on a second, because the Zionist is very definitely not the friend of the Jewish people. The Zionists hide behind the Jewish people. They weaponize vocabulary so that any criticism of the Israeli genocidal agenda can be then dismissed as anti-Semitism, when nothing could be further from the truth. So, this is a very, very testing time for people to take a look at their belief system and look at whether they are simply regurgitating what Murdoch and co are actually printing and expecting them to regurgitate, or whether they can actually dig deep and find that capability and capacity for critical thought. So on that basis, the Labour Party is a no-no. The Tory Party, i.e. the Conservative Party of Israel, is a no-no. It needs something completely fresh, and that's not the independent Blairite Labour Party, who are effectively hoping that there can be some kind of miracle and Tony Blair can be embraced back into British politics. This is a man who has probably more blood on his hands than any other individual alive today, and yet he walks the corridors of perceived power, and yet he cannot go out in public. So there is some justice. Well, the justice, of course, will be meted out not in this world, but when he has the opportunity to reflect on his performance once he crosses back over from whence he came. So something new has to emerge. What that might be, who knows? This is where the creativity comes in. This is where communities need to come together to decide whether or not the incumbent that they have allegedly elected to represent their views in Parliament, whether that incumbent remains their desired candidate or preferred candidate, or whether they come up with something completely different. I mean, imagine a situation where we had 650 independent MPs in Parliament. Of course, it would be chaos initially, but out of that chaos would emerge something that, might just have the broader interests of the population at heart, as opposed to the self-serving interests of either the Tory, the Labour Party, and the individuals who wear that particular rosette. So, who knows? Anything could happen, anything may happen, but it is also incumbent upon the local party associations to hold the feet of their current MP to the fire. And what we've seen recently with Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, the pro-remaining MP, and he got lambasted by his local constituency association, and he lost a vote of confidence by 182 to 131. So in theory, he should be out on his ear, and the Conservative Party Association in that constituency should be holding interviews and going through the selection process of a new candidate. But step in the establishment, and George Osborne, of course, he who effectively managed to more than double the size of the national debt in his tenure as the Chancellor. And he writes, Dominic Grieve is deselected because of his beliefs in the EU campaign. The Tory leadership can stop any deselection if it wants. We frequently did. Conservative Party HQ should suspend the local party. Otherwise, we are heading for a huge historic split in the Tory party. Yeah? And the problem with that is, well, George Osborne, you know, you demonstrated that your coke-addled brain, you know, really wasn't up for the role that you held. And, you know, you blagged your way through those years as the Chancellor. And, you know, somehow, obviously, you are very well protected by the establishment. But on the other hand, you know, you do us all a favour because it shows, you know, the type of individual, the type of sociopath that can succeed in politics. All you have to do is prostitute your humanity, sell your soul, and, you know, like I've said many times, karma is a real bitch. Well, so let's see how things unfold. Are we out? Is the legal challenge upholding March the 29th as the predetermined date at which the European Communities Act is repealed? Will that be upheld? Is April the 12th going to be the day on which the UK crashes out? That's Murdoch phraseology. Crashes out of the UK? Well, let's hope that the UK is able to make as clean a break from the totalitarian dominion of the European Union at the earliest possible opportunity. And then the chaos that ensues, well, that's down to each and every one of us. And the less we participate, the greater the chaos. The more we participate, then the greater the opportunity that just maybe, the UK might once again find some moral compass, and we might be able to address the horrendous issues of child poverty, of rapidly deteriorating health, of a failing healthcare system, of a rampant pharmaceutical industry that shuts down effective treatments for conditions where Big Pharma has the monopoly and is able to generate enormous amounts of revenue. Can we get a grip on the rollout of 5G? Because, you know, we hear a lot about the climate change and extinction rebellion, but you're not going to be hearing any one of the advocates of those narratives really talking about things that matter, really matter, like 5G, like the prevention of effective cancer cures such as GC-MAF, and the imprisoning of the people that try and bring these products to market. You're only going to hear or read what the corporations want you to hear or read, whereas those following the alternative media actually are getting a more balanced view. And it's the alternative community that really does hold the key to how this plays out. Well, I'm going to take a short break from live streaming. I've got AV10 coming up in 6 weeks' time, and the AV10 conference, I believe, is going to be the most seminal AV event to date. We have a tremendous speakers panel, 7 speakers making their debut at AV events. Deborah Tavares coming over from the USA, Mads Polvik, the banker turned politician from Denmark, Gemro Doherty, the former mainstream journalist and presidential candidate for the Irish Republic, and now ardent campaigner against corruption in the Irish Republic. David Dubine, who is going to be discussing his research into what is really happening on climate change, and it's a long way from the narrative that's pumped out by the left wing who buy into the UN narrative of anthropogenic climate change. Something's happening. It's potentially far more significant than is being shared with the wider public, and David Dubine will be coming in from the Far East to share his insights into the unfolding climate issues, and in particular the impact on the world's ability to grow sufficient crop. John Smith going to be talking about the common law process, the common law courts, and the significance of common law, particularly at this time, as every effort, of course, is made to usurp common law with statute. Clive de Carle, speaking at his first AV event, and looking at the way in which we can take responsibility for our health and not completely subsume ourselves to Big Pharma. And David Ellis, who will be familiar to many regular viewers of UK Column, and David Ellis talking about the deeper agenda behind EU military unification and the importance of this stage in the process for establishing global governance. And David Ellis will be sharing insights that maybe push the bounds of most people's perception, but nonetheless it's important that people start to actually think longer term and not just, you know, next week or even at the end of the month. So AV10 was actually sold out some 6 weeks ago, 3 months before the event. So we have been looking at ways in which we can share this on a wider basis, and hopefully later today or certainly this week we'll be announcing that AV10 will be able to be viewed on pay-per-view, and the details of this, I say, will be published a bit later. So hopefully we get the opportunity to get the AV10 presentations out to a global audience on a real-time basis. So although I've said I won't be doing any early morning live streams, I'm still obviously going to maintain a presence on social media. It's just going to be a bit more random than being at 7:30 on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. But meanwhile, of course, UK Column will be continuing to broadcast at 1 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. And of course, 21st Century Wire will be broadcasting on Sunday evening. So share these alternative media platforms, because it is the alternative media that is having such a massive effect, which is why the establishment is doing everything it possibly can to try to neuter and shut down those of us who put out a point of view which doesn't necessarily go hand in glove with the official narrative. But now is the time for us to have a far greater input in that narrative than the establishment really wants. So, as is always the case, do your own research, and it's down to each and every one of us to play our part in ensuring that the legacy that we leave future generations is something that we can be proud of, because currently I would suggest that that is certainly not the case. So thanks for joining me this morning, and let's see how things unfold. And I will be back with the morning live streams on Monday the 28th of April 2019, and I'm very sure that there's a hell of a lot that's going to happen in that 4 weeks.